Silent scan.
Underground grid connected. Please insert your passkey. Passkey accepted. Downloading payload. I don't have much time, but I know what you must be thinking, and I want you to know that I'm alive. Our team is alive, and phase 2 is still a go. Don't give up on us, Jay. These people, they need us. The digital grid needs us. We have to keep sharing stories of those who are resisting global genesis. I'll contact you when I can. The truth lives here. The future is listening. The Operators, Part 3. I'd always been a light sleeper. As a child, it used to put me in a strange place, somewhere between rest and wakefulness. I would find myself aware, but paralyzed in the darkness of my own body. Seconds would tick by like minutes. I would will myself to move, to speak, but the only sounds I could make were the screams inside my own head. I was trapped in a body that no longer obeyed my commands. The first couple times it happened, I thought I was dreaming. But then I found myself eyes open, blinking even, but unable to move. That was the worst. It scared me so bad, I started fighting sleep altogether. Insomnia began to set in. I would go 2, even 3 days at a time without sleep. It left me exhausted, edgy, and unable to focus. More and more often, the monitor teacher found me dozing off in the middle of lessons, sleep creeping up on me without my consent. The changes in my behavior were dismissed, though. A child who unexpectedly loses a mother is bound to have some changes in behavior. So I was sent home with a note from school and looked on with expressions of sympathy and pity. Everything came to a head the night Jenny woke Dad in the middle of the night. She complained that I was acting weird, and it was keeping her awake. Dad found me huddled in the corner of the room, talking to someone or something that wasn't there. I don't remember much about that night, only that it was difficult for me to distinguish reality. Worried I was on the edge of some kind of psychotic break, Dad began seeking help. The doctor in our town was extremely expensive, and seeing as how she was on the Global Genesis payroll, she was selective with what she was willing to do on trade. That meant most people who sought her help either had capital or some kind of leverage. My father had neither. That hadn't stopped him from trying, though. Dad made one attempt at bribery before deciding a real doctor was out of the question. The attempt had, to put it in his words, more than failed. He never told me what that meant exactly or what happened. All I know is he came home in a sort of daze. Without a word, he beelined to the bathroom and turned on the shower faucet. After about an hour, the shower steam billowed through the crack beneath the door so thick, I began banging on it, worried he had passed out in there. It was the one and only time I can recall him ever yelling. He barked at me to go to my room so angrily and forcefully through the door that I jumped, bursting into tears on my way there. Though he apologized later and never spoke more about his experience, I got the impression it left him feeling sullied in some way. With traditional medicine no longer an option, my father went to the next best thing he could think of. People in town sought out Suli's herb teas for all kinds of ailments. From flock looking for a night watch stimulant to mothers with fussy babies, Suli's teas were said to be potent and effective. Despite the glowing reviews, I had been skeptical and suspicious when the old woman showed up at our door. 1 cup of tea each night, and play this music while she sleeps, she said as she handed a bag of dried herbs and a round device to Dad with wrinkled and shaky hands. The symptoms will get worse before they get better. She will have to brave the storm to find peace. The brew was thick and black, the taste so earthy I had to down it as quickly as possible to keep from gagging. Dad made the routine immediate, being sure to turn the droning music on after tucking me in each night. Though it helped combat the insomnia, Suli had been right. On the bad nights, my dreams became plagued by horrifying night terrors. The worst nights ended in intense episodes of sleep paralysis that seemed to last forever. I had always been a light sleeper, but eventually Sully's teas chased away the other symptoms, and I was never disturbed by them again, which is why it was a disorienting shock when I found myself awake, aware, and trapped out in the wilds. The jolt of adrenaline I felt at the sound of distant, clumsy footfall was so intense, it was a physical pain in my chest. At first, I thought it was so dark I couldn't see, that I had tied my safety rope so tight I couldn't move. Then I realized there was no sensation of movement. Panic surged for an entirely different reason as I remembered where I was and the danger we were in. I managed to flutter open my eyelids. Illuminated in the dim light of the moon, my little sister was still sitting on the opposite side of the tree, but I could tell by the look on her face she knew something was wrong. Her mouth was moving, my name forming on her lips, but all I could do was stare at her. I tried again to move, focusing on wiggling my fingers, but that familiar weight, the one that terrified me as a child, seemed to have settled in my body once again and refused to obey. Jenny was throwing off the tarp now. The forest was eerily silent again, and it was a lucky thing the worn material made little sound. My stomach hollowed out as I watched her reach for the knot at her hip. She was undoing the part of the rope that kept her tethered directly to the trunk. Her hands trembled as she worked the knot loose. She paused, fingers hovering at her side, then she tied one end of the rope around her waist and the other to the base of the branch closest to her. She gave it a small tug to make sure it was secure, and then took a breath. "Don't!" I cried. Only I didn't. Because my lips didn't move. No sound had come out. My awareness thrashed at my uncooperative body, but it was no use. I was still paralyzed. Jenny carefully got to a crouch. She squeezed her eyes shut a moment, and then took a steadying breath before she started inching her way along the branch. 1 inch, another, the slack in the tether scraping quietly against the bark of the tree as it trailed behind her, catching once and releasing with a light tug. I think my eyes might have gone wide. Jenny was afraid of heights, and to make matters worse, was not exactly nimble when it came to climbing. Although I'd picked this tree because the thick trunk and branches provided the perfect aerial nesting spot away from ground predators, a fall from this height would be disastrous. Was Jenny even familiar with the right knots? Had I ever bothered to show her? She swayed once, throwing out an arm to steady herself, and I would have tensed if I was capable. The wind had picked up since we made camp, and it blew the escaped strands of her black braids into her face. She ignored them, though, taking steady breaths in through her nose and out through her mouth with each inch she crept forward. The crook of the branches was thick enough that she was able to come around my one side. She was about to touch my shoulder when an ear-splitting roar cut through the silence. Everything happened very quickly. Jenny was startled, then she tensed as the nerve pain was activated. Her foot lost its purchase, eyes widening, her arms flailing out in search of balance, fingers grasping at air. She began falling backwards as the deafening roar went silent. Somewhere through the haze of pain, my body finally caught up with my brain. I instinctively shot myself forward, arms reaching out, fingers grasping. For a second, there was nothing but air. Then something came into contact with my fingers, and I grasped at it with all my strength. A sharp sting sliced the fingertips and palm of my right hand. Another sharp pang ripped at my side, the socket of my shoulder, as weight pulled at my body. I clamped my mouth shut to stifle a cry. I must have closed my eyes. When I opened them, Jenny was dangling mid-air, 5 feet above the forest floor, her body twisted and upside down. My heart nearly stopped until I saw the safety tether, taut and trembling, where it had snagged on a high branch. My hand had caught the edge of her cargo pants, where the thick pockets had been sewn, but the fabric was never meant to bear that kind of weight. Even with the tether taking most of the strain, I could feel the seams beginning to give. She clutched her arms tightly around her torso, trembling. Her glasses were gone, and below us her hat lay abandoned in the dirt. If it hadn't been for my own safety rope anchoring me to the tree, I would have gone face first right after her. The rope held, but now I was hanging at an awkward angle, pinned against the branch. Pain flared where it cut into my skin, but I forced myself to reach with my free hand, searching for better leverage. There was no way I could pull her up with just one arm. I'd be lucky if I hadn't already dislocated my shoulder. And worse, there was almost nothing to grab hold of. Jenny's rope groaned. I could see and feel the tether fraying where it had caught, bits of strained fiber beginning to give. It wouldn't hold long, and when it gave way, Jenny would fall. Somewhere nearby, a stick snapped. My eyes darted towards the sound, but the forest was dark save for a few lightly glowing plants off in the distance. I could barely make out the outline of the plants below. A few threads of Jenny's tether unraveled with a dry snap. She sucked in a breath as her body dropped 2 inches, jerking when the rope caught again. I mirrored her breath, straining against the tug that sent pain through my already injured shoulder. Her wide eyes locked onto mine, and I was about to say something when a sudden movement caught my attention. A prickling sensation crawled up the back of my neck. We weren't alone. It took a moment to register what I was seeing, or perhaps more accurately, what I was not seeing. It was so subtle I almost missed it. The forest floor was moving. It was as if the weight of 4 large clawed feet were pressing down in the shape of a predatory prowl. I'd seen pictures once of giant bears found out in the western province. From the size of this thing's gait, it had to be larger. But the beast below was invisible. I stared at the impressions on the ground as the thing prowled directly towards Jenny. It let loose a low, guttural sound and then began sniffing softly. A quiet crunch sounded below. Likely the beast had stepped on Jenny's glasses. She froze. For a second, I was stunned. But unlike the weighted feeling the paralysis of sleep brings, this was a disembodied feeling. It was as if I was floating somewhere outside my body, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to think. Another twig snapped as the beast took another step. The sound tore me from my stupor. This was bad. There was no way to get Jenny up undetected and no way to survive going down. I suddenly remembered the bits of salvage I had shoved in my pants pocket on the train. Could I reach for it? Distract the thing prowling below? Or could it see us? At any moment, the last bit of Jenny's tether could give way. If that happened while my hand went for the salvage, there was no chance of catching her. The thing sniffed again, and this time the sound came from near Jenny's head. Her eyes stared up at me in horror. Slowly, so very slowly, she tilted her head back to peer in the direction of the sound. We both held our breath as she stared unseeingly. Sniffing sounded again. Then something like a snort and an exhale tousled her hair in a cloud of condensation. She flinched and then grimaced at the bits of slime that flew from an invisible snout. It beaded on her face, but she remained utterly still. That's when giant pointed teeth seemed to appear from a crack in the air, rows and rows of them, as the thing opened its giant jaws and growled. To Jenny's credit, she stayed perfectly still. My hand trembled against my pocket, fumbling with cold and nerves pinned between my own weight and the safety rope. I ground my teeth, forcing my numb fingers to inch deeper with little success. Above Jenny, the tether gave a final audible creak. I knew she felt it, but fear kept her frozen. The creature sniffed again, its floating teeth tilting upward, angling in to catch the sound, to lean closer. Straining, my fingers wiggled further beneath the rope and deeper into my pocket until the hard metal grazed the tips of my fingers. The beast bumped against Jenny, teeth frighteningly close to her ear. She shut her eyes, biting down on her lip to keep from making a sound. Scooping as much metal into my hand as possible, I ripped it free with a wince and sent it flying. The light patter it made when it hit the ground seconds later had the beast whirling. With an angry growl, it took off running in the direction of the sound, loud sniffing beginning when it drew close. Jenny wasted no time. She threw herself forward, catching hold of my arm and my extended hand as the frayed tether finally gave way. Bracing her boots against the trunk of the tree, we managed to pull ourselves back up. She must have hurt her side in the fall, because when she finally collapsed in the safety of the branches, she had one arm wrapped around her middle and had put the weight of her body fully on one side. We both sat there, panting and hugging each other awkwardly. The relief was short-lived. When we first went into the wilds to look for the train yard, Fence volunteered to guide the way. He'd done his best to point out any plants or insects best left avoided, and although he helped mark 2 routes for safe passage, he'd accompanied us for the better part of 2 months before we made our first trip alone. The rustling of injured footfall had gone silent so long I had all but forgotten about it when a shriek sounded several yards away on the opposite side of the tree. I knew the cause immediately. Blue night bar. On this side of the forest, there were dozens of them. They dotted the forest floor, the trunks of the trees, fallen logs. A hazy mist was beginning to fill the air, and the surrounding plants began to disintegrate. During the day, this fungus looked something like a translucent flower, easy to overlook. At night, it was known for its neon blue glow. Beautiful as they were, these mushrooms spewed spore particles into the air whenever disturbed that would eat away at organic material. Plants, insects, flesh. In the dim glow, the outline of the shrieking woman was crashing through the underbrush. Off balance, arms flailing like she could bat away the mist that was engulfing her body. She tripped, hitting the ground with a loud thud, before jumping back to her feet. The pain must have been excruciating, because she'd abandoned any sort of stealth and seemed to be fleeing in random directions, more mist spewing into the air where more mushrooms were disturbed and more plants quickly disappeared. The bees were closing in now, the sound of clashing leaves filling the air, louder, closer. Vegetation parted, shrubs shook violently as 3 of them zeroed in, 2 from behind and the one I had distracted moments ago from the front. Jenny and I watched helplessly. In a last-ditch effort, I hurled the bits of salvage from my pockets, but it was too late. The little metal bits were not enough to divert the beast's attention from an easy meal. The woman either saw, heard, or sensed what was coming for her because she let loose another bone-chilling scream. It rang out into the night air as the closest beast lunged. The scream was cut short by a sickening crunch. Jenny and I clung to each other, trembling and shivering. I squeezed my eyes shut as if darkness could shield me from the sounds below. Squelching, tearing, snapping, the occasional territorial hiss. I told myself not to listen, not to imagine, but my mind filled in the gaps with vivid, bloody images anyway. We stayed frozen like that for a long time, long after the gruesome sounds were replaced with echoing silence, long after the beasts finished their meals and wandered off, long after the bitter cold leached the warmth from our bodies and the sun began to rise. We made it to the edges by early morning, and I sagged with relief when the fence marking our town borders came into view. A male figure came sprinting towards us. He went to Jenny first, who still had one arm wrapped protectively around her torso. Taking her face in his hands, he examined it. His thumb brushed along the scratch marring her cheek. She probably got it at some point during the fall. I was so worried. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Jenny shook her head, and he released her. "Your glasses." His tone wasn't exactly a question. "I'll get new ones," Jenny said tiredly. When his green eyes settled on me, there were dark circles beneath them, and his handsome face was drawn. Fence just stared at me a moment, something like longing and disbelief tugging at his features. I got the impression he had been here on the edges for some time, pacing and sick with worry. "When you didn't come back last night, I thought... His voice trailed off as pain flashed into his eyes. He pulled me tightly against him. I was afraid I lost you both. I winced a bit, but melted into the embrace. We're okay. My voice was barely audible, and Fence reluctantly pulled away to search my face. You two must be exhausted, he said, picking up the salvage bag I had discarded on the ground. Let me hide this. Then let's get you two home. Fence walked further into the wilds, stopping several yards away at a gnarled-looking tree. He kicked at the pile of leaves and pine needles near its base with a booted foot before pulling something from his pocket. He knelt, fumbling with something on the ground, before opening a trap door. I blinked in surprise and exchanged a look with Jenny, who shrugged nonchalantly. Fence lowered the salvage bag into the hidden compartment. When he was finished, there was no sign the secret storage space existed. Fence met my curious gaze with a half grin. He ran a hand through his brown hair and gave me a guilty expression. The underground grid has about half a dozen of them spread out along the edges of town, a dozen or so in the wilds. I shook my head. It's fine, I said and meant it. You don't have to defend yourself, I understand. Fence stared at me a moment like he wasn't convinced, but then nodded. I'd come to terms a long time ago with the fact that Fence kept secrets from me, not because he wanted to, but because living a life on the edge meant a certain amount of discretion was required. Much of what Fence and what I did would be considered degenerate activity by Global Genesis. In many ways, it was best for both of us if certain things were on a need-to-know basis. When we arrived back home, Fence had a fire going in a matter of minutes. After spending the night in frigid temperatures, the warmth was welcomed. Jenny and I were so exhausted, neither of us bothered to change clothes. She created a little pallet on the floor by the fire and was asleep in minutes, laying on her side, arms still hugging her torso tightly. I was watching her intently from where I sat on the sofa when Fence put a blanket over my shoulders. Can I see? He asked quietly. Tearing my eyes from Jenny's sleeping form, I looked at him questioningly and then saw his gaze fixated on my hand. I'd wrapped it quickly with a bit of cloth early this morning. I'd been so preoccupied, I'd mostly forgotten about it, and the dull throbbing became suddenly apparent. I extended the injured hand to him, wincing when my shoulder protested with movement. I'm gonna look at that shoulder next, he declared, before unraveling the cloth to inspect my bloody fingertips where the nails had been ripped down to the quick. His gaze held mine a minute before he got up. There was rustling in the kitchen and the sound of running water. Seconds later, he returned with a clean cloth and a basin. Then he began cleaning the wounds. How? The word was so low I barely heard him. They must have broken when I caught Jenny from falling out of the tree, I replied flatly. Fence paused to hold my gaze. No. How are you two alive? I stared at him a moment before my gaze shifted to the fire. A rush of images flooded my thoughts, and I squeezed my eyes shut against them. I felt Fence wrap a hand around my leg and squeeze gently. Nobody who has ever gone into the wilds at night has ever lived to tell about it, Lo. But somehow, you two survived. How? I opened my eyes to meet his gaze again. I took a deep breath. I don't think the beasts can climb. They seem to hunt mostly by smell and sound. Either they can't see at all or they can't see well. At least, I think. I can't be for sure. They had other game they were interested in. Fence gave me a questioning look. There was a woman out there, I added slowly. A degenerate or maybe a refugee. We were in the trees when she was on the ground and, well, if you run and they hear you, it's over. Fence just stared at me for a moment, an unreadable and dark expression clouding his features. Then he stood, turning away from me to stare into the fire. I closed the distance between us, tentatively taking his hand in mine. Alex, what is it? I asked. He stared into the fire for a moment before meeting my gaze. He gave me a weak smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. I could tell there was something bothering him, but knew better than to push. He would tell me when he was ready. Nothing. We can talk more when you've rested. Let me look at your shoulder. He pressed his fingertips to muscle and gently moved my arm in various directions, taking note whenever I winced. I think you pulled something, but nothing seems out of place or broken. I nodded slowly. You should get some rest, he added. I made myself comfortable on the sofa, and Fence threw a blanket over me. Suddenly, the idea of sleeping alone was unbearable, even with Jenny just feet away. I caught his hand. "Alex, will you stay with me?" His green eyes softened at my request. "Of course." Settling himself behind me, he ran his fingers through my hair and kissed the top of my head. I closed my eyes, savoring the light touch. The moment I did, the physical and emotional exhaustion crested like a wave over my body. "Sleep," he whispered, as unconsciousness began to tug me under. By the time I woke up again, the fire had burnt down to embers and the house was dark. I'd been pleasantly surprised. Maybe it was the sheer level of exhaustion I had felt, but somehow I had slept well. I sat up slowly, stretching and wincing when my injured shoulder protested. My body was still stiff and sore, but I felt the slightest bit better than I had this morning. What had happened in the wilds felt distant and far away somehow, even though I knew it can never be forgotten so easily. Likely, the memory would haunt me for a very long time, but I shoved that thought away, one problem at a time. Fence and Jenny were gone, but I could hear faint murmuring coming from the other room. I got to my feet and padded towards the bedroom, their conversation becoming clearer as I closed the distance. "We may never get another chance like this," Jenny was saying in a hushed voice. "Will you help me or not?" The door to Jenny's room was ajar and light filtered through the crack. I paused outside, an odd feeling coming over me. It struck me as odd, the fact that the two of them were conspiring in the other room together. What was going on exactly? "What do you need?" Fence's question was resolute, firm. I never could have been prepared for what I saw when I pushed through the doorway. Jenny was sitting at her desk with Fence standing behind her. They were peering at something that was giving off a faint glow. When they both turned to look at me with stunned expressions, it became very clear as to what. Jenny rose from her seat and turned to face me head on. She raised her chin in stubborn protest. The first emotion I felt, once the shock passed at seeing the powered-on laptop, was worry. I opened my mouth to speak, but Jenny beat me to it. "Before you ask, no, it's not connected to the network. Yet," she added. The look on her face was indignant. Not an ounce of remorse could be found. My anger flared. How could she be so irresponsible? Hadn't she heard me when I said to leave the laptop on the train? Suddenly, everything seemed to fall into place. The way she had put all her weight on her sides when she was climbing, the arm she had kept protectively around her torso. She hadn't pulled something. She had been protecting this. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. "Low," Fence warned, approaching me slowly as if I were a dangerous animal or in danger of lashing out. Then a bigger realization dawned on me. It was so huge it deflated half my fury. My expression must have changed because both Fence and Jenny looked perplexed. "It was your idea." The words had come out in somewhat of a whisper. I blinked a few times as the realization settled in my mind. I met Jenny's gaze. "To salvage. It was your idea." Fence must have been just as shocked as I was, because he looked at Jenny suddenly with accusatory eyes. Jenny's face softened, and I knew I was right. "You weren't just looking to make money. You were looking for this," I accused, gesturing towards the laptop. Jenny's lips pressed into a hard line as she stared at me. She folded her hands and took a breath before she lifted her chin again. "Yes," was all she said. "Why?" I demanded. The word had come out more forcefully than I had intended. Jenny jumped. She closed her eyes for a moment and took a steadying breath, but when she opened her mouth to speak, I cut her off. "Do you really want to talk to Mom that bad? She left us, Jen. No warning, no goodbye. She didn't even leave a note. She was just gone. Nothing but a work transfer notice left on a pillow." I could feel Fence's attention on me now, but I didn't care. As far as he knew, my mother was dead. Though I had never said as much, it had become clear that was his assumption based on the way I spoke about her. I never corrected him. Why bother? As far as I was concerned, she died the moment she left without saying goodbye. Jenny was shaking her head now, her face suddenly tired. "It's so much bigger than that, Lo," she replied quietly. I narrowed my eyes at her and shook my head at the non-answer. I think I might have snorted. "Bigger how?" I demanded. "She wants to make the underground grid digital," Fence chimed in quietly. I felt my face go slack as my gaze shifted to him. He was leaning against the wall now with crossed arms. No more playing telephone with whispers in the shadows. No more several-month delays to share information. A digital communication center with updates, field reports, broadcasts, you name it. Suddenly, my head was spinning. I held up a hand to silence him and made for the bed, but Fence didn't get the hint. He pushed off the wall, his voice full of passion and hope in a way I had never heard before. Just think about it, Lo. It could change everything, he continued. I sunk onto Jenny's bed and placed my head in my hands. The floor creaked as his boots came into focus before me. The underground can share information and connect in a way that hasn't existed since the old world. Think about what it could mean. We have a chance to create real change. All the things we've talked about wanting for ourselves. Don't you want to try? Stop talking, I snapped, and he went quiet. Several moments of silence passed as I tried to get my reeling head to stop spinning. I didn't know which thing to tackle first. The fact that my little sister had lied about a plot that would likely get us killed, or the fact that she was the only person I knew who was genius enough to pull something this crazy off. And if she did pull it off, what could that mean? I got to my feet then. Jenny's expression didn't change, but Fence looked hopeful. I held up a hand to both of them. I need a minute, I said, before exiting the room. Outside, the air was cold, and I pulled the blanket I took from the sofa tighter around my shoulders. I sat down on the front stoop of the house and stared up at the night sky, hoping to somehow get the answers to questions I didn't even know how to begin asking. The silence only filled my mind with more what-ifs and more confusion. Normally in situations like this, I would sit down with Dad, and he would have some grand wisdom to share. But Dad wasn't here. And it was possible we would never see him again. Global Genesis had taken him away, just like they had taken away our mom. It was true that Global Genesis had done nothing to earn my favor over the years. Like many other people in town, I hated them and desired a life full of more freedom and ease than I had available to me. But Global Genesis was all-powerful and so full of resources. Their laws were absolute. How could two young women measure up to that kind of influence? Would we even stand a chance? Or would we be squashed like little bugs before we even knew what hit us? I said nothing when the door opened, and Fence sat down beside me. A moment of silence passed before he spoke. I know you're mad, he began calmly. But I think you should hear her out. Your sister is brilliant, and she has given this a lot of thought. I don't doubt her brilliance, I said flatly. Thing is, I sighed and pulled my eyes away from the sky to look at him. I thought my sister and I knew everything about each other. Now it just feels like she has this whole other life she never told me about. Fence tucked a stray hair behind my ear and gave me a weak smile. You said the same thing about me once you started really getting to know me. Hell, you even thought Fence was my real name. But we worked it out. His attempt to be funny did nothing against my mood, and I rolled my eyes at him. It didn't ruffle him in the slightest. Jenny's just trying to protect you. I pressed the palms of my hands together and pressed them to my lips. I sat there in silence a moment before speaking again. I'm the oldest. It's my job to protect her. But this? Succeed or fail, I'm not sure how to protect her from this. Fence's hand rubbed soothing circles along my back, and I squeezed my eyes shut, taking a deep breath. If we do this, there is no going back. If they catch wind of what we're up to, Alex shushed me, gently pressing his fingertips to my lips. What is it you always say? One problem at a time? I rolled my eyes, but he bent to meet my gaze. When he finally succeeded, he raised his eyebrows and gave me a goofy grin. I laughed in spite of myself. Then his face grew serious again. You wouldn't be alone. I know some people. They've been trying to organize for a while now. They'll help. My gaze shot to Alex, and I looked around for any signs we had been overheard. The breeze whistled through the tree branches, but there was no sign of anyone else. When Alex spoke again, his tone made me look at him. I want to tell you something, he began. Earlier, when you told me about what happened out there, you knew something was bothering me. I shrugged and nodded. Yeah, but I knew you would tell me when you were ready. He nodded once, and then his gaze went skyward. My father taught me everything I know about the wilds. Before the work accident that crippled his leg, he used to harvest blue night bar spores for the red dragons as a side hustle. The mercenary group? I blurted, then cupped my hand over my mouth. The red dragons had their hands in all sorts of things, most of them wildly illegal. They were said to be involved in anything from smuggling refugees to various forms of piracy and beyond. As the largest and most notorious mercenary group in the country, membership was an enforced lifetime commitment, with death being the only exit strategy. Sure, everyone knew of the Red Dragons, but I had thought they were mostly concentrated in places like Genesis City, not all the way out here in one of the ruralest parts of the northern province. Suddenly, I couldn't help but wonder what else was hidden here right under everyone's noses. Alex just nodded, paying no mind to my incredulity. It was clear his thoughts were someplace else. It was dangerous work, and it paid really well, he continued. For a harvester, the best time to harvest blue night bar is near sunset. It's the time when the mushrooms are easiest to see before dark. Dad had heard rumors about the beasts, and even though he had never seen them, he knew it was better to be safe than sorry. The trapdoor you saw earlier, I took the idea from the ones my dad built out in the wild as his contingency plan in case he ever found himself out there too close to dark. After the accident, he stopped going past the edges at my mom's request, but when underground contacts got word there were refugees from the western province trying to make their way to Genesis City, mostly women and children, they knew my dad was their best chance of making it through the wilds. Despite his crippled leg, Dad agreed. A bad feeling settled into my gut as I began to suspect where the story was heading. Alex didn't talk about his father much, but I knew he had died rather suddenly. Though he had never said so, I got the sense it was something he never quite moved past. He didn't make it back, did he? I ventured slowly. Alex continued to stare at the sky for a moment before meeting my gaze. I knew the answer before it escaped his lips. No, he said simply. He didn't. Some of the refugees had been injured on the way to the checkpoint. Like you, they were caught by sunset out in the wilds. According to the underground contact that accompanied him, my father managed to save all of the children by hiding them underground. But the beasts got to the rest before they got to the next trapdoor. I'm sorry, I said lamely, having no idea what else to say. Alex met my gaze. When he spoke, his voice was calm and determined. He didn't know about the trees, Lo. Maybe more people could be saved if they had a way of sharing valuable information. A way of communicating freely and more immediately between towns. Hell, between provinces. He held my gaze a moment, letting his words sink in. Then he pulled me into him and pressed a kiss to the side of my head. Just think about it, he added, before getting to his feet and going back inside the house. I watched him go, the echo of his words repeating in my head. About an hour later, after I had managed to sort my mess of thoughts, I found Jenny back in her room. The laptop was closed and she was squinting at a pad of paper which she was scribbling furiously on. She turned, shooting me an unreadable expression when I knocked on the doorframe. Come to yell some more? She mused. I ignored the comment and crossed my arms, preparing to get straight to the point. Or also yell some more. I wasn't sure which yet, but I was at least determined to start this conversation with very little emotion involved. Is it true? You want to make the underground grid digital? I asked slowly. She nodded once, her eyes narrowing at me suspiciously. I held her gaze. And how exactly do you propose we do that? A grin tugged at the corner of her mouth. Are you saying you're willing to help me? She ventured. I rolled my eyes and shoved my waking irritation down. Just answer the damn question, Jenny, I replied impatiently. So much for keeping emotion out of it. Light footfall sounded, and I glanced over her shoulder to find Fence coming to stand beside me. He gave me an excited and supportive grin that was quickly wiped off his face by the glare I shot by way of response. When my gaze flickered back to Jenny, it was clear she was holding back laughter. She cleared her throat and began again in a serious tone. Well, phase 1 is setting up a home base, so to speak. We need a communications base, somewhere hidden and not easily detectable where I can build the necessary equipment and keep it running. I know a place, Alex chimed in, and my gaze snagged on him. Of course he knew a place. I wanted to ask him for more details, but now was not the time for that. Jenny continued. If she was the least bit surprised by Alex's offer, she didn't show it. Great. Then we will have to plug into the Genesis network without being detected. I shifted on my feet, memories of the last time Jenny connected to the network flooding my mind. I chewed on my lip to keep myself from saying something sassy I might regret. Jenny must have read my expression, though, because she added quickly, "Don't worry, I won't make the same mistake twice. I know a better way." There was no need for her to go into more detail than that. Likely I wouldn't have understood it even if she had. I continued to chew on my lip for a moment. Okay, so let's say we set up home base. Then what? Jenny didn't hesitate when she spoke. She got straight to the point. We will need to set up active nodes in strategic locations across our province that are capable of transmitting and receiving data. That's phase 2. Phase 3, we do the same in other provinces. I chewed my lip as I deliberated. I could feel the heat of Alex's gaze, even though I kept my eyes focused on Jenny. She seemed to be waiting patiently for my reply, and in that moment it occurred to me how grown she was now. My little sister was no longer so little. She was becoming a brilliant and courageous young woman. I knew I should have been mad or hurt or a flurry of other negative emotions, but all I could feel in that moment was pride. My sister was forging her own path and actively fighting for the future we had all talked about, dreamed about. This was it. This was really happening. Nervousness and a sense of anticipation settled into the pit of my stomach. Though I had no idea what would happen once we started this, I knew it was going to be big. Tell me what you need from me. This is Blake C. Holloway. We hope you have enjoyed this production of The Operators, Part 3 by Blake C. Holloway. This program was produced and directed by B. Holla Entertainment. Text copyright 2025 by Blake C. Holloway. Production copyright 2025 by B. Holla Entertainment. All rights reserved. This is a copyrighted work. Unauthorized copying or distribution is a crime. Transmission terminated.